Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive today. We're going to be talking about something that's pretty interesting, I think, and that is the power of active listening in sales.
Yeah,
So we're going to be going over some stuff from this guide by Meet Record. Have you heard of Meet Record?
I have. Yeah, they're a company that specializes in conversation intelligence. So they do a lot of work around analyzing sales calls and really breaking down what makes for a successful conversation.
Okay, cool. So conversation intelligence. I mean, this is obviously something that sales leaders care a lot about. I mean, they're always trying to figure out, what are the things that make our team more effective? How do we close more deals? How do we build stronger relationships?
Exactly. And that's what's so interesting about Meet Record's approach because they're really getting to the nitty-gritty of how we communicate.
Yeah.
And they're finding that active listening is one of those key skills that can really make or break a sale.
So I'm curious, like when we talk about active listening, I mean, it seems kind of obvious, right? Like you should listen to your customers. But Meet Record takes it a step further. What are they saying that's different from just, the basic idea of paying attention?
So they break it down into four key components: attention, understanding, feedback, and retention.
Okay.
And each of these is a little bit more nuanced than you might think. At first glance, you might think, okay, attention, I get it. You got to be present on the call. But they talk about specific actions you can take to signal that you're truly tuned in, like using verbal affirmations or asking clarifying questions.
So it's not just about being there physically.
Right.
It's about being mentally engaged as well.
Right. And then there's understanding. This goes beyond just hearing the words that are being said. It's about really grasping the meaning behind those words, understanding the context, the nuances, the underlying motivations.
Okay, so you're not just listening to the words themselves. You're trying to understand the bigger picture.
Yeah. And then there's feedback. This is where you're demonstrating that understanding by reflecting back what you've heard, paraphrasing, summarizing, asking clarifying questions to make sure you're on the same page.
So it's kind of a two-way street. You're making sure that you've understood correctly, and you're also giving the customer the opportunity to clarify or expand on what they've said.
Exactly. And then finally, there's retention. This is the one that I think is often overlooked. It's not just about being present in the moment, but it's also about remembering those key details from the conversation.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's about taking that information and actually using it to build a stronger relationship.
Right, because if you can recall a specific detail from a previous conversation, weeks or even months later, it shows that you were truly listening and that you value that relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm starting to see how this whole active listening thing goes beyond just, basic good manners. It's really a strategic approach to sales.
Absolutely. And Meet Record actually lays out 5 compelling reasons why active listening is so crucial for boosting sales outcomes.
Okay, let's hear them.
So the first one is building rapport. This
Hmm.
is about going beyond just transactional interactions and really creating those human connections with your customers.
Makes sense. I mean, people like to do business with people they like and trust.
Right. And active listening is a powerful way to build that trust. Because when someone feels like they're being heard and understood, they're more likely to open up and be receptive to what you have to say.
Okay, so active listening helps to create a more positive and collaborative environment.
Exactly. The second reason is uncovering true needs. This is where active listening really shines, because oftentimes customers don't even know what their true needs are.
They might come to you with a specific problem in mind.
Yeah, but by actively listening, you can probe deeper and uncover those unstated needs and motivations. That might lead to bigger opportunities for you to provide value.
Okay, so active listening helps you to identify those hidden opportunities that you might otherwise miss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The third reason is shifting the focus from being product-centric to becoming truly client-centric.
Okay, so instead of leading with your product, you're leading with the customer's needs.
Right. It's about understanding their challenges, their goals, and tailoring your solutions to meet those specific needs.
So it becomes less about selling and more about problem solving.
Exactly. The fourth reason is boosting customer satisfaction. This one is pretty straightforward. When you truly understand your customers' needs, you're more likely to deliver solutions that meet or exceed their expectations.
Which leads to happier, more loyal customers.
Right. And the fifth reason is spotting new opportunities. This is where active listening can really pay off in the long run.
How so?
Well, by paying close attention to what your customers are saying, you might pick up on clues about upcoming projects, new initiatives, or even potential referrals.
Okay, so active listening helps you to stay ahead of the curve and identify those emerging opportunities.
Exactly. So as you can see, active listening isn't just some fluffy feel-good concept. It's a powerful tool that can have a real impact on your bottom line.
Yeah, I'm starting to get that. And I think the thing that's really intriguing me is this idea of uncovering those true needs that customers might not even be aware of themselves.
Right. Because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And it's through that process of active listening, asking those probing questions, and really digging deep that you can uncover those hidden gems that can lead to bigger and better solutions.
Okay, so Meat Record is making a pretty compelling case for why active listening is so important in sales. But I'm also curious about the how. Like, what are some of the specific techniques that they recommend for becoming a better active listener?
Well, that's what we're going to dive into next because Meat Record doesn't just tell you to listen better. They actually provide a whole toolkit of practical strategies that you can start using today.
I like the practical strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
All right, so let's get into some of these practical strategies from Meat Record. The first one they highlight is the power of open-ended questions.
Okay, so this is like instead of asking yes or no questions.
Right, it's about asking questions that encourage the customer to open up and share more information. So instead of saying, "Are you happy with your current software solution?" you might ask something like, "What are some of the challenges you're facing with your current software?"
Okay, so you're giving them the space to elaborate and provide more context.
Exactly. And that can lead to some really valuable insights because sometimes customers don't even realize what their biggest pain points are until they start talking about it.
That makes sense. So by asking those open-ended questions,
Yeah.
you're kind of helping them to uncover those hidden needs.
Exactly. And Meat Record actually provides some really helpful examples of how to rephrase those common sales questions to be more open-ended. So they'll give you like the traditional question and then they'll show you how to tweak it to be more inviting and encourage a deeper conversation.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about the theory, they're actually giving you the practical tools to implement it.
Right. The next technique they highlight is paraphrasing.
Okay, so this is where you're basically repeating back to the customer what you've heard to make sure you understand correctly.
Right. But it's a little bit more than just parroting back their words. It's about summarizing and synthesizing the information in a way that demonstrates your understanding.
So it's kind of like you're putting it in your own words, but still capturing the essence of what they've said.
Exactly. And Meat Record gives some really good tips on how to do this effectively. Because you don't want to make the customer feel like you're just testing them or that you weren't listening in the first place.
Right. You don't want to sound like a robot.
So they suggest using phrases like, just to make sure I understand correctly you're saying, or so it sounds like your main priority is it's about fooling it in a way that shows that you're actively trying to understand their perspective.
Okay, so paraphrasing is a way to demonstrate that you're listening and that you're engaged in the conversation.
Exactly. And it also gives the customer the opportunity to correct any misunderstandings or provide further clarification.
Okay, that makes sense. The next technique they talk about is empathy.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is about putting yourself in the customer's shoes and trying to understand their emotional state.
Right. It's about going beyond just acknowledging their problem and actually connecting with how they feel about it.
So instead of just saying, I see that you're having trouble with X, you might say something like, I can imagine how frustrating that must be.
Exactly. Because when you demonstrate empathy, you're showing the customer that you care about more than just making a sale. You care about their experience and their well-being.
And that can go a long way in building trust and rapport.
Absolutely. And Meat Record points out that empathy doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing. It can be as simple as using phrases like, that sounds challenging, or I understand your concern.
Okay, so it's about those little touches that show you're human and that you're listening with your heart as well as your head.
Right. The next technique they highlight is nonverbal cues.
Okay, so this is about body language, eye contact, all that stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's not just about reading the customer's nonverbal cues. It's also about being aware of your own body language.
Because sometimes we're sending signals that we're not even aware of.
Right. So things like making eye contact, nodding your head, smiling, these are all ways to show that you're engaged and listening attentively.
And on the flip side, things like crossing your arms or looking at your phone can send the message that you're not really interested.
Right. So it's important to be mindful of your body language and make sure that it's aligned with your message of active listening.
Okay, so nonverbal cues are a powerful way to reinforce your verbal communication.
Exactly. The next technique Meat Record highlights is seeking clarity.
Okay, so this is about asking questions to make sure you understand something correctly.
Right. And it's important to do this without fear of sounding stupid, because sometimes we're so afraid of appearing ignorant that we just nod along and pretend like we understand when we really don't.
And that can lead to problems down the road.
Exactly. So, Meet Record encourages salespeople to embrace the power of dumb questions because oftentimes those clarifying questions can lead to some really valuable insights.
And it shows the customer that you're taking the time to really understand their needs.
Right. So, don't be afraid to ask questions like, can you explain that a bit more? Or just to make sure I'm clear on this, you're saying?
Okay, so seeking clarity is a sign of intelligence, not ignorance.
Exactly. The next technique they talk about is summarizing.
Okay, so this is where you're basically recapping the key points of the conversation.
Right. And it's a great way to show that you've been paying attention and to ensure that everyone's on the same page.
And it also gives the customer the opportunity to correct any misunderstandings or add anything that they might have missed.
Exactly. So Meet Record suggests using phrases like, so to summarize what we've discussed so far, or just to recap the main points.
Okay, so summarizing is a way to bring closure to the conversation and to make sure that everyone's moving forward with the same understanding.
Exactly. And the final technique they highlight is patience.
Okay, so this is about resisting the urge to jump in with solutions before the customer's finished speaking.
Right. Because sometimes we're so eager to prove our value that we interrupt or we start talking over the customer.
And that can be a real turnoff.
Exactly. So Meet Record encourages salespeople to practice the art of silence, to give the customer the space to fully articulate their thoughts and feelings without interruption.
Okay, so patience is about respecting the customer's time and allowing them to lead the conversation.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that sometimes the best solutions come from truly listening and understanding the problem before jumping in with a pre-packaged pitch.
Okay, so Me Record has given us a lot to think about here. But I'm also curious about the challenges. Like, what are some of the things that get in the way of active listening?
Well, that's what we're going to dive into next, because Meet Record doesn't just present this idealized version of active listening. They also acknowledge that it's not always easy. And they highlight some common challenges that salespeople face when trying to be better listeners.
Okay, I'm interested to hear about those challenges because I think it's important to be realistic and recognize that this stuff takes effort.
It definitely does. But with the right mindset and the right strategies, you can overcome those challenges and become a more effective active listener. So let's talk about some of those challenges. Meet Record says can make active listening tough. The first one they bring up is preconceived notions. We've all been there, right? You walk into a call thinking, oh, this is just like that other client from last month.
Yeah, you think you already know what they need?
Exactly. But as Meet Record points out, that kind of thinking can really blind you to the nuances of each individual situation.
So you're not really listening with an open mind.
Right. You're already coming in with assumptions, and that can prevent you from truly understanding the customer's unique needs.
So how do you combat that? Like, how do you force yourself to come in with a fresh perspective every time?
Well, Meet Record suggests ditching the pre-written scripts and approaching every conversation with a genuine desire to learn. Instead of listing out the problems you think the prospect has, ask open-ended questions like, what are the main challenges you're facing right now?
Okay, so it's about letting go of those assumptions and letting the customer lead the conversation.
Exactly. The second challenge they highlight is distractions. I mean, let's face it, we live in a world of constant distractions.
Oh, yeah. Emails, text messages, social media. It's hard to stay focused.
And it's not just those external distractions. Meet Record points out that even something as simple as taking notes can become a distraction if you're not careful.
Because you're so focused on writing everything down that you're not really listening to what the customer is saying.
Right. So they suggest minimizing distractions by turning off notifications, choosing a quiet space for calls, and even using meeting intelligence tools to handle note-taking for you.
Okay, so technology can actually help us to be better listeners in this case.
Exactly. But they also offer a unique suggestion. Even if you're using a tool, keep a pen and paper handy for quick notes that don't require you to break eye contact with the prospect.
Well, that's a good tip. Because sometimes you just need to jot down a quick thought or a key takeaway, and you don't want to have to fumble around with your laptop or your phone.
Right. The third challenge they discuss is responding too quickly.
Okay, so this is like that urge to jump in with a solution before the customer has even finished explaining the problem.
Exactly. It's like we're so eager to prove our value that we forget to actually listen first.
Yeah, and that can make the customer feel like you're not really taking the time to understand their needs.
Right. So Meet Record suggests training your team to pause before responding. Give the prospect the space to finish their thoughts and resist the urge to interrupt.
So it's about being present and letting the customer lead the conversation.
Exactly. And they offer a great example. If a prospect mentions a challenge with their current software, don't immediately launch into your pitch about how your product solves that problem. Instead, pause and ask, could you tell me more about the specific issues you're encountering?
Okay, so it's about gathering more information before jumping to conclusions.
Right. And that pause allows the prospect to elaborate and gives you more information to work with so you can tailor your response more effectively. The final challenge Meet Record highlights is monologuing.
Ah, yes. The classic sales trap. Getting so caught up in the pitch that we forget to engage in a two-way conversation.
Right. They recommend aiming for a 60-40 or 70-30 listening to speaking ratio, with the prospect doing the majority of the talking.
Okay, so it's about striking a balance between providing information and actually listening to what the customer has to say.
Exactly. And if your team is slipping into lecture mode, encourage them to ask open-ended questions that bring the focus back to the prospect's needs and experiences. Questions like, how has this impacted your individual priorities?
Okay, so it's about making sure that the conversation is truly a dialogue and not just a one-way presentation.
Right. So those are some of the key challenges that Meet Record outlines. But the good news is that they also provide some practical tips on how to overcome those challenges and become a more effective, active listener.
And that's really what it's all about, right? It's about recognizing that this stuff takes effort, but the payoff is huge.
Absolutely. Because when you master the art of active listening, you're not just improving your sales skills. You're
Wow.
building stronger relationships, gaining deeper insights, and ultimately creating more value for your customers.
And isn't that what sales is all about at the end of the day? It's about solving problems and helping people to achieve their goals.
Exactly. So if you want to take your sales game to the next level, start by investing in your active listening skills, because it's a skill that will pay dividends for years to come.
So there you have it, folks, active listening. It's not just a nice-to-have soft skill. It's a revenue-driving superpower that can transform your sales team from average performers to trusted advisors. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive and that you're walking away with some actionable insights that you can implement in your own sales process. Remember, it all starts with listening.